You're listening to a CNA podcast.
Hey there, it's Andrea Heng, and you're listening to the Money Talks podcast. This week, we're not talking about how to invest or save your money. Instead, we're going to talk about how to get out of some toxic financial habits that you may or may not be aware of. It's a really personal one for me, okay, because I had so many bad financial habits before I came to this podcast. But before we get into that conversation, I wanted to start with some really quick financial headlines with my editor, Tiffany Ang. We call this Eye on the Money.
Yes, that's right. So, Andrea, have you started planning for your holidays? I wanted to start on that because I've been looking through. I don't usually plan for my holidays. It's just that now that I have kids, it helps me to forward plan.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, the answer is yes. I'm already planning. I already booked my tickets and I'm already planning a trip to Japan.
Nice.
I'm very excited. Long-awaited break.
Good.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it.
So for somebody like you, good news. If you are a fan of the multi-currency app Youtrip, do you use it?
Yes,
Good.
that's the one I use actually.
Good. So they have just announced that they will raise their e-wallet limits.
Yeah, I was really quite happy that this news came out just recently because I am a user of Youtrip. I only strictly use it for traveling. So yes, now users of Youtrip can hold up to $20,000 in their e-wallet.
Singapore dollars, by the way.
Singapore dollars, that's right. And then they will also give you an annual spending limit of 100,000 Sing dollars on that card. And then, of course, Revolut and Wise, those are their competitors. They're also expected to raise their limits too. So what happens is, along with these raised limits, Youtrip is also announcing a few anti-scam security measures.
Which is good.
Very important.
Very important in this
when
day
you're
and age.
using these cards overseas. You don't know what you're vulnerable to. So they're going to introduce a kill switch. So what it does is it lets customers freeze their accounts. And I think it is so vital today. What do you use?
I use Revolut. Sometimes I just feel like you get a better exchange rate than if you're just using your bank credit card.
Right. And that's important to you.
Of course. And also saves the hassle of going to a traditional money changer as well before the trip.
So the other thing that we wanted to talk about also is those Red Sea attacks.
Yeah, that's quite
unfortunately.
serious.
So the TLDR is Houthi militants who are backed by Iran, based out of Yemen, they're attacking ships that are carrying cargo. Now, the Red Sea, if you don't already know, is one of the busiest trade routes in the world. And of course, because of these attacks, those freight rates have already gone up by 20%.
And that's not all. There's even a war risk surcharge of between $500 to $800. What does this all mean for us? Well, bottom line, we may have to brace ourselves to pay more for some of our purchases. I mean, as of now, in Parliament, they say that there is no problems on our essential
no
supplies.
immediate impact,
No
right?
immediate impact, but who knows how long this will drag for. Well, if you want to know more about why these militants are attacking the cargo ships and what's being done to stop them, go to cna.asia to find out more.
Let me tell you a quick personal story. At 28, I was $60,000 in debt. I'm not going to tell you how I got there, but I will tell you that it was a long and excruciating journey to get out of it. The banks I owed probably had me on speed dial. I didn't tell my family. I didn't have anyone to turn to for help or advice. And reflecting on this time, I've arrived at the conclusion that I may have unwittingly perpetuated the same financial habits that my dad had. And it wasn't his fault, okay? Because all he wanted to do was to give us the life he never had, even though he couldn't really afford it. Today, the good news is both my dad and I are completely debt-free, and I cannot tell you the relief and the freedom that it has brought us. My dad can now retire in peace. The bigger question in my mind was, what if my family's financial habits were healthier? What are some toxic behaviours that we practice that makes our hard-earned money work so poorly for us? That's what we're going to be talking about today on the Money Talks podcast. And if you are in the same position right now, is it too late to unlearn those bad habits? I have just the person on the podcast to walk you through his own journey and perhaps give you some hope. He's Benny Ong, co-founder of I Quadrant. It's an investment advisory community. Welcome to Money Talks, Benny.
Wow, your story is really close to heart to mine as well. So,
Right?
yeah,
It's like we led parallel lives at some point, right, Benny?
it is.
Tell me, what was some of the habits you inherited from your father, financial habits?
So the backstory is really a typical money no enough movie plot, like a
Okay.
Jack Neo movie, right? My
Yeah.
dad was so obsessed with providing a life, like good life for us. So when I hear how you speak earlier, it touches my heart because we have that big TV, we have that holiday trip that we can't afford, right?
Yeah.
And the next moment I realized was my dad just sunk into such a deep credit card debt, and you know the interest rate of credit card debt is
Oh, yeah.
is
It's brutal.
is brutal, right? So we got really trapped, and I remember a time where I have $5 a day as allowance when I'm in my poly.
No way.
And you know, in poly we have to have breakfast, lunch, and projects due dinner.
Projects,
right?
those
Yeah.
cost so much money back then.
So I have $5 a day, right? So I was in a very desperate need for money, and then that was a very bad saga and chapter. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that was how I got started. When I have my first experience and relationship with money, it was credit card debt.
I know what you mean. I didn't quite know that that we were in debt, but I knew that my dad was really stretching it financially, and all he kept telling us was, you know what, don't worry about it, don't worry about it. You know how dads are, right?
Yeah.
Don't worry about it. We just want to make sure you're comfortable. So when was it that you realized that these habits were actually detrimental to your family and ultimately to financial health, to someone's financial health?
So as a young kid, I was telling my dad, like, hey, why are we moving to such a small house?
Yeah.
So he broke down and cried, and then that was the first time I saw him crying. And I felt the financial pressure because I realized that when someone have money stress like me, it actually hurts the relationship with the family because it felt that my dad couldn't live up to the expectations.
Yeah.
So these creep in really early for me. Fortunately, I was so haunted by it. I was so against credit card debt moving forward. So rather than a bad habit, right, I experienced it firsthand, and it actually got me extremely prudent when it comes to money.
When did you start practicing the opposite of what your dad did?
I think, especially when I start to make money in my poly days, that
As
was
a part-timer?
I was
or-
like 18, 19 years old as a part-timer, right? I start to be this massive saver, right? But there's a very big downside to that as well because I became like a hodler. I just hold on to money because I
Yeah.
don't want to be poor again, right? And then actually, that is really not a good habit.
Right. Okay, that's interesting. Walk me through that.
I was just so obsessed with holding to more money, and I have zero financial exposure in terms of investment because I
Right.
was so cautioned, right? And when I really stepped into my first investment, it was 24. I was being sold with some pre-IPO shares.
Oh,
You see,
wow.
It sounds weird just hearing it, right? Yeah. But I got no clue, right? So I invested 30K of my hard-earned money.
Oh my gosh.
Money that I really saved for quite a long
Yeah,
while.
that's a long time for a part-timer.
Right, and then especially when after your army days, right? So
Yeah.
I took so long to save this amount, thinking that it would get me to riches in like 10x to the moon, right?
No.
So I just realized the company was a scam, and that was a very big, painful thing. And
Oh man.
no experience growing up, and my first investment was flushing everything away from my bank.
So basically, you try to turn things around for yourself only to fall into a different kind of trap. You became a victim of a scam, an investment scam, and all that hard-earned money just gone.
It is. I was in a very bad habit and space of trying to prove myself right.
Yeah.
So I'm just ignoring every red flags and just want to be so obsessed with the answers I needed to say
Yeah.
yes to the bad investment scheme, right? And there's no such thing as market research or
Yeah.
reading up. And
Yeah.
honestly, if I were to just Google it, I would
And
have...
we had Google by
right,
this
right.
time, yeah.
I would have avoided it, right? But I was avoiding red flag. That's how crazy my wealth blueprint was.
Yeah.
Not hunting for them and seeking
Yes.
clarity, but I was just literally ignoring red flags. And that was really, really bad. Yeah. So
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily blame you. Yes, it was a very painful lesson, but you also grew up in a household that didn't necessarily give you that financial literacy. How did you crawl back out of that one?
it was really hard, right? Because that left a huge scar in investing. So me being a entrepreneurial person, I started doing my own business 12 years ago. So I was just so obsessed then to focus on my business. Every dollar I have, I just start throwing into my business and reinvesting into it, right?
Yeah.
And what I realized at my late 20s was I completely mismanaged my personal finance because it was such a dark chapter to overcome.
Yeah.
I rather just don't look at it anymore and say, you know what, if I put in hard work for my business, maybe one day I can become like a huge millionaire, right? Running business, like a young
Yeah.
20s, right? So but it was really bad because when I have very bad personal financial grips for my own finance, actually is a reflection in my business as well.
Yes.
So I was doing the same thing, but right now in a different medium. I was investing in the wrong marketing campaigns. I was hiring people without concern about budgeting. So I realized that I don't really escape from this trap, right? It was the same trap.
Yes.
It was in a different platform.
So this is like a third round for you.
It was a third round, right?
Oh my gosh.
I mean, I can elegantly put it now because I kind of...
Because we survived it, right?
Yeah, I kind of like survived it, right? But I can assure you during those periods, it was pain. And, and we talk about bad business decision, right? I sunk into close to about $150,000 of business losses.
Oh my.
It wiped out the entire bank account to overdraft. It's bad. So,
that was bad.
So when you talk about investing, right, so people will be like excited about what move I made. But when I look at myself, right, I made the same bad decision personally and in my business as well. So I have to get out of this rut. That was my take,
because basically you were perpetuating a vicious cycle over and over again and you didn't know how to get out of it, right?
It is,
Yeah. So it's interesting that you brought that up because I wanted to ask you about the toxic financial habits that you harbored during this time. We usually think of toxic habits as just accumulating debt. But there are other things that we do on the day-to-day, right? Like emotional or stress buying. I'm guilty of that. Getting groceries without checking the cheaper options. Even comparing ourselves to other people, our peers, and then feeling that we need to keep up by going on certain kinds of holidays, for example, that we can't afford. Break this down for us. How can these potentially be bad habits that lead us to the positions that you and I have landed in?
So I guess when it comes to growing up, I wear a very soft rule when it comes to money management. So the word that is subtly in my mind is called it depends. So one of the best systems in Singapore is actually the CPF system. It's hard rule, right? It don't go, it depends on how much money you put in every month, right? It's hard rule.
is there.
Yeah, so what I came out from was to realize the idea of really embracing hard rules when it comes to personal financing. Maybe even creating your own CPF system with your two different bank accounts, right? Like taxing yourself, right? So that's what I've been practicing. But when it comes to bad habit is when you allow such thoughts to creep in. Like it depends, going, oh, this month actually I'm feeling a little bit stressed.
Yeah.
Maybe I can save a bit lesser. Or actually I think I deserve a little bit more. I think I need more self-love, quote unquote. I can spend, right?
Self-care, here I come.
Right?
Yeah.
And it really don't pay off because when you allow such it depends rule to creep in, even for your personal fitness, you don't get there, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you have
it's
to go.
discipline.
You have to go to the gym, not like, it depends on how well is my quality of sleep tonight, right? So that was what happened. And to me, there's one overarching bad habits that people wear, and I wear definitely 100% when I was growing up, right? And it creeps into decisions like what you mentioned, like holiday decision, lifestyle decision, right? Because when it's a hard rule, you can't touch the money, right?
Yeah.
So you only can go too bad, right? Not it depends. You go like,
correct.
Maybe next month, right?
Yes, exactly. And that's what I've started doing as well when it comes to big ticket items, holidays. We always stop ourselves and think, can we afford it? If we can, okay, let's go for it. If not, then you know what? Maybe next year. So that's a fantastic way of putting it, having a hard rule and really instilling that discipline. So I crawled painfully out of my own debt, the old school way. I gave tuition after my 9-to-6 job. I don't know how I did it. On top of that, I was starving all the time because I would buy a jumbo loaf of bread and a tub of cream cheese. I'll put that in my office fridge. And that will be my breakfast and lunch for the rest of the week until payday. That was my scenario for a whole year. And on top of that, I refused my parents' help because I was also in a way punishing myself because I wanted to feel this pain so I would never forget it, so that I would never ever get in this trap again, right? So I'm curious, how did you come out of that?
The real first thought that came to my mind was, why are we not best friends yet? Because I did that loaf of bread thing and stuff just to get by my poly days, right?
This deserves a fist bump.
It's so crazy because it's just so happy to know that I'm not suffering alone.
Yeah.
There are people who really made bad choices in Get Out, right?
Yes.
But on the more serious note of what you just mentioned, right? I guess the idea was to really sit down and have that personal conversation that nobody's there to give you that final advice if you have no clarity of what you really want, right? So seeking education was my first step.
Yep.
So I was really surrendering myself to like numbers because I'm not a financial guy. I have to remove toxic sentence like this.
Yeah.
I'm not a numbers guy. I don't know about investment. I'm a business person, right?
Just because you're not a numbers guy doesn't mean you cannot
Right.
be.
Yeah. So I have to start from internally removing those sentences, then really go out there to seek the knowledge. What I then began to do was really looking out for practitioners. To me, that's so important because you can learn from theories. People will say, do this, do that, right? But I really surround myself with people who are doing it, right? To me, that's so important because when they put their money into what they're doing, the conviction is different.
Yeah.
And when they share how they do it, right, that comes from a real life experience. So that's how I really get off of my rut. I have no money, but I know that network was important.
Yes.
My family profile, I love them. My dad is so close to me, but none of them are financially literate, right? And
Yes.
that's the pure fact, right? Like,
Yeah.
if not, why would we be the classic money know enough plot of Jack
Yeah,
Neo, right?
exactly.
So I have to surround myself with a different group of people. And the hardest part was getting them to accept me as their friend.
Yeah.
Because I have no values to play, right? I'm not
Yes.
someone who have deep wealth of
That
knowledge in investment.
we're not in their circle. We're not in their league, right?
Right, yeah. So that was a tough push. So I forced myself to surround myself with a different group of friends. And lastly is really to just choose a few to be focusing in. Like, I realized you can't master stocks, you can't master like everything at one go, right?
Yeah.
So I picked something that I really like growing up,
Okay.
which is real estate. I'm that weird kid of like 16 years old looking at condo.
Wow.
Yeah,
really?
I can't afford it, but I just like to go to new launch and showroom to see, right?
I know,
Yeah.
right?
So I
Yeah.
picked real estate because there's just this soft touch to like owning a home.
Right.
And I see how can I be good at least one thing so that I can change my financial well-being.
That's a very interesting approach to how you got out of it. My way was just brutality. On self-inflicted brutality. So actually the other end of the toxic financial spectrum too, and you brought this up briefly also, people who are obsessed with money, you were hoarding it at one point,
Yes.
right? And they have what experts call a scarcity mindset. Essentially, you're just squirreling away all that money because you're just so afraid to be out of it, right? Have you come across other people like that, and what do you say to them?
Oh, I have the perfect story to always tell people on this. Partly because if you spend your whole time saving, right, you will eventually still make a business investment move, like a business move or investment move. So if you don't make the mistake with $1,000, you're going to make it with a $10,000 mistake. So like me, I wasn't investing thousands. So my first mistake was a tens of thousands of mistakes.
Yep.
So what happened to a lot of people when they are hoarders is that by the time they reach to 50s, their first investment move is about $200,000 to $400,000. And can you imagine that first investment move was 10 times worse than mine when they realize they lose everything?
I'm so nervous listening to this already.
Yeah. So my point is that you really can't avoid mistakes. So you rather start spending thousands to clock the lessons than when you are faced with this predicament where I have to do this all-in move.
Yeah.
And if it's a big sum and you have no experience, right, you're going to get caught. And that's why you see a lot of cases of like big money game scams where people are
Yeah.
irrationally putting in $200,000.
Because it's a quick buck, right?
Because they are not educated their whole life. They have been hoarding monies and finally they have to do something without knowledge, right? So that's the most painful part. So I say to people, if you are not willing to let go of $1,000 to learn by buying stocks and realize what does it mean to you, right? By the time when you are so desperate to invest, you're going to get caught really badly.
Oh, that's a really good scenario, and it can be fatal to your financial health, and you don't want to end up there, right? So we talk a lot about setting financial goals. What if you earn a modest salary then, and then you have a family to feed, and we're living in expensive times, 9% GST, high interest rates. Yes, the Fed is going to start cutting rates. Everyone else will follow suit, but we're not going to see the effects of that until much later in the year even. How do we start if we are earning just that kind of salary and yet have that cost of living to bear with?
Really simple. 90+% of people in Singapore are homeowners. And if you really get 3 moves right throughout your next 2-3 decades of your life, you will inevitably end up with a 7-figure retirement sum. So even if you have no money to invest outside of your home, you need to be extremely crucial about your home decision. For example, what do you do after you get a BTO? What do you do after MOP 5 years later, right?
Right.
Those are key moves because you don't have new money, right?
Yes.
You can't save, right? So,
Exactly.
but you need to get that 3 real estate move right. Because once you get them right, you are riding along inflation. So inflation is on your side. The problem with savers, like we said earlier, is that inflation is against them.
Right.
So they are always desperately trying to make a crazy move at the end of the day when saving for 30 years because they are now realizing that their saving is not big enough. So
Yeah.
once you attach yourself to the financial instrument, say you own a real estate with debt, good debt, then you are riding along inflation, right? So
Yeah.
I say to a lot of people that there's really hope, even though you have no money.
Correct.
The same story will be our parents, right? I will say that because if our dad to make 3 crucial real estate moves during their times, they will probably end up with a terrace home.
Yeah,
without any additional single saving.
exactly.
And that's what is still possible in today's age, not about owning a terrace home, but at least having a comfortable retirement pot if you get a real estate move, right? So that's why I say to people, you are making those moves anyway, be extremely crucial about those moves and don't do it loosely for your
Yeah.
real estate decision.
Yeah, your timing and your homework is everything in that
It is.
decision. What would you advise then to someone who is done with debt, trying to kick bad financial habits? What's the first thing we do once we're out of debt?
I'm going to say something controversial,
Okay,
But it's
let's hear
important.
it. We like controversial
is
here.
to get back into debt.
Oh, wait a minute. Walk me through this.
Yeah, because especially if you have a limited amount of money, you have to use that and leverage to maximize your return.
Okay.
I think real estate is safe enough in Singapore. Let's not talk about overseas to use that debt for safety. So you want to re-establish your relationship with debt.
Okay.
Because as much as there's a lot of bad debt, but think about it, right? How many billionaires and millionaires actually have debt? I think almost everyone, right?
Yeah.
So the very fundamental fact is that most people are debt-free, but they are not financially free.
Right.
So to get to financially free, you have to build a new relationship with that because that is the fastest way to help you to get there.
What do you mean by building a new relationship with debt? How does one do that?
Right, yeah. So it sounds very pseudo, right? But
Yeah.
but it's actually very technical. So number one, understand where does the interest go to? If I buy a home and I'm paying mortgage, do I actually make money? And why are some people proclaiming that they make 20% a year when the market is only growing at 4%? So you really need to re-establish clarity of using that, because if you understand where the money goes to, how does the principal pay down makes you way wealthier, and how does that give you a multiply effect of your capital appreciation, those things helps you to now finally understood what is debt all about and
Right.
why the richest uses debt. And why if they have cash, why don't they always pay cash, right?
Yeah.
So there's a reason why so, right? If you have a small pot of gold, let's just say we're not talking about people with like generation wealth, right?
Yeah.
Then it's important for you to find your own formula. What do I mean? Find something that can make you about 15 to 20% a year rather than 5%. You see, I'm not opposed with 5%, but my problem is if I have 50,000, the 5% can't do much, right?
Correct.
In 30 years, right?
Yeah.
So you have to master either a stock game or a real estate game.
Right.
So, and if you want to make 15 to 20% in real estate, you have to embrace that.
Is real estate the only way I can get that kind of return though?
I think there's many ways, but for me personally, my own opinion is it's safe enough for me to take that in real estate.
Right.
I don't take that in stock, in every other instrument, not even in crypto.
Why
I would
is
never
that?
do that. Because the exposure is really huge, and real estate is a income generating asset.
Got it.
Which means it will always have its value, right? Versus a stock, right? Because the company can go bust tomorrow.
Yeah.
And now you're on a huge debt from the stock price, right?
Correct.
I mean, if it all went crashing, right? So for me, real estate have a utility to it. Like, is
Okay.
there's some
Yeah.
value, right?
Right.
And think about it. I just do not see a way where Singapore real estate will drop 20%. So there's just always that base value, right? So
Yeah.
it will be very safe to have that debt
Okay.
on real estate.
Interesting perspective. I like that. Rebuilding your relationship with debt. I'm going to keep that in a placard in my house. Just to wrap up our conversation here, is it possible for someone to take these toxic habits well into adulthood and old age? And what's going to be the trajectory to get out of it? Can we change that?
It's never too late to change, but more importantly is how should we change it, right? I think education is a good approach, but not the best approach.
Right.
You really need to change the people around you because you need that positive pressure, right? Then the negative comfort around you to say stick to those bad habits, right? So you have to find a community of people that allow you to practice financial habits differently. And we talk about these young people. My daughter is 4 years old. She's given a weekly allowance and she have to manage her finances right now.
Wow.
And she might be very new to this, but it starts from there. She
Yeah.
knows that daddy makes money from buying and renting. So she said that, buy and rent. So then I asked her, what is rent?
Yeah.
Collecting money every month.
Wow.
So I think the exposure is so important, especially for younger folks, because of the need to invest. At the world where whatever is going on with the wealth gap widening, you have to be equipped to invest. And I would say that the next generation must learn financial literacy and investment.
Well, you know what? By the time your daughter gets to primary school, she'll be teaching her peers at the canteen
Oh no.
what to buy and what to rent and collect money. So kudos to you for giving your daughter a good head start. And it's something I'm sure you and I wish we had. But without the adversities that we had and overcame after that, we wouldn't be in the position to teach the next generation as well, right? And that's what we're doing here at Money Talks as well. So Benny, thank you so much really for sharing your story, living this parallel life with me. I don't feel alone anymore. And most importantly, your wisdom. Thank you for sharing all of that with us on Money Talks.
So happy to be here.
And as always, a big thank you to you, listener. If you found this episode especially helpful and enlightening, please let us know. We would love to hear your survival stories as well. We're streaming on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We're also up on YouTube. So if you have the time, take a listen, leave us a rating and those comments. For Money Talks, the team is Joanne Chan, Tiffany Ang, Crispina Robert, Saya Wint, and I'm Andrea Heng.